The President of the United States called the governor of California at 10:30 at night to ask him what he thought of his nickname. Not about policy, not about the 13 dead Americans from the war he started, not about gas prices that were climbing through the roof. Not about Los Angeles, which had just burned, where thousands of families had lost everything and were still waiting on federal disaster relief sitting on his desk unsigned. He called to ask about the nickname. And then, apparently satisfied with that, he wanted to know how many MAGA hats Gavin Newsom had sold that month. 21, Newsom told him. He sold 21 hats. Trump wanted to brag about this to his political opponent at 1:30 in the morning from Mar-a-Lago. This is the man who controls the nuclear codes. Newsom told the story the way a man tells a story he still can't quite believe happened, even though he was there. The call came in around 10:30 his time. Trump was on the other end, allegedly having read him the riot act. At least, that was the version Trump later told reporters. The actual call, as Newsom described it, involved the nickname, the hat sales, and then a pivot to something even more unexpected. Trump told him Melania was upset. Newsom was confused. He started to ask what about. Trump cut him off. "Oh, I get it. We're all good. He was hurt," Newsom said. That was the word he used, hurt, because Newsom had said something critical about him at his own inauguration, and Trump had apparently gone home, told his wife, and then called the governor of California in the middle of the night to report that she was upset about it. Kimmel heard this and said what every single person watching was already thinking. There's no way Melania was upset. She probably wrote it herself. The audience erupted, not because it was a complicated joke, because it wasn't a joke at all. It was the obvious thing, stated plainly. Melania Trump's public persona at this point is essentially the performance of loyalty to a man whose name appears in the Epstein files, at events she visibly does not want to attend, wearing expressions that have generated their own entire category of internet documentation. The idea that she was privately wounded by a governor's inauguration speech and then dispatched her husband to call that governor at 1:30 in the morning to register the wound landed as comedy because it landed as fiction. "If we called him right now," Newsom said, gesturing at the phone, "he'd answer." He mentioned he had the Mar-a-Lago number, but underneath the comedy of the midnight call and the hat sales and the nickname audit, there was a second story running simultaneously, the one that didn't get told nearly as much because it's harder to make funny. The president called the governor of Texas and told him he was entitled to 5 congressional seats. Not asked, not requested, entitled. The governor of Texas obliged. District lines were redrawn mid-decade before a midterm election to benefit the president's party because the president called and said he was entitled to it. That is not politics. That is not strategy in any conventional sense. That is what happens in countries where elections stop being real, where the outcome is shaped before the votes are cast, by the person who benefits from the shaping, calling the person who controls the pen. Most people have no idea this happened. It got buried under 30 other stories that week. And that burial, the way the volume and pace of events makes each individual event harder to track and remember and respond to, is not an accident either. It is the specific advantage of operating at a speed that exhausts accountability. Los Angeles burned in January. Thousands of families lost everything. People were still in temporary housing. Debris removal had only recently finished. Recovery was underway, but slowly, and with the particular fragility of communities that had lost not just their houses, but the accumulated evidence of their lives. Federal disaster relief sat on the president's desk, unsigned. Not because of a policy disagreement, not because the funding wasn't available, because California voted against him. And this is what happens when you do that. Your city burns, the president holds the pen, and he waits. Meanwhile, he called the governor of California at 10:30 at night to discuss the nickname situation. Newsom had 4,000 of his National Guard soldiers federalized. Trump sent 700 active duty Marines, not overseas, but to Los Angeles, the second largest city in the United States. That happened. People should not forget that it happened. There is an observation Newsom kept returning to, not as political attack, but as something closer to psychological diagnosis, delivered by someone who had sat across from the man multiple times and watched how he operated. Trump at least wants to be loved. You can see it. You can feel it in the midnight calls and the nickname requests and the report that Melania was hurt. There is something almost legible about it. The hunger for approval from the people who have withheld it. The compulsion to perform dominance to people who refuse to be dominated. The need to call enemies to ask whether the name is good. But then Newsom said the thing that should sit with you longer than the joke about the hats. Jay Wienick doesn't want to be loved. Marco Rubio doesn't want to be loved. These are people who looked at everything Trump represents, the midnight calls, the hat counts, the district lines redrawn by phone, and decided the only logical move was to become it, not for the love. Not for the approval, for the power itself, stripped of even the need for validation. That, Newsom said, is a different and darker thing entirely. Trump is a man who needed to break things to feel powerful. You can trace it. You can watch it in real time on the midnight call logs and the Truth Social posts and the unsigned disaster relief sitting on the desk of a burning city. But the people around him who absorbed the lesson and removed the part about needing to be loved, those are the ones who should keep you up at night. He's historically unpopular. The midterms are coming. The redistricting calls are documented. The Marines went to Los Angeles. The relief check remains unsigned. The hat count was 21. And somewhere in Mar-a-Lago, at 1:30 in the morning, the phone is already ringing. Subscribe if you think the midnight call says more about power than any speech ever could.